They said it was an accident, a spark, a fluke, nothing more. But when a lone farmer's barn went up in flames, it ignited something far bigger. They thought he was just a quiet man with old land. They didn't know he once wrote the laws they now try to bend. And he's done being silent.
They say the American dream is a house with a white picket fence. Mine was a little different. More like a 50-acre plot of scorched earth, rich soil, and the kind of peace only rusted hinges and creaking barn doors can give you. I never cared much for neighbors, sidewalks, or block parties. Give me cornfields, a tractor, and silence broken only by wind and birds, and I'm home. I bought this land in Willow Creek County nearly 6 years ago, after retiring from federal service. Not the I wore a badge and chased bad guys kind of service. No, I was a legal counsel, the ghost in the room behind major courtrooms, the one judges and prosecutors called when things got complicated. Let's just say I've written closing arguments that made headlines, helped draft rulings that unraveled careers. I'm not a celebrity, but in the right circles, my name doesn't need an introduction. Out here, though, no one gives a damn who you used to be. And that's just the way I like it. The property sits just outside of a suburb that's been metastasizing like a slow-growing cancer. HOA territory. Rows of cloned homes, matching mailboxes, and rules about grass length. My land, however, was old agricultural zoning, grandfathered out of any HOA reach. I verified it through every county record and legal document before signing the deed. Hell, I had it tattooed in my brain. Not under HOA jurisdiction. The first letter came on a Tuesday. Cream-colored envelope, neat little emblem embossed on the flap. Willow Grove Homeowners Association. I nearly laughed out loud, thought it was some marketing flyer. But inside was a printed notice, formal and offended. Your property presents several violations of community standards, including excessive overgrowth of vegetation, presence of non-conforming structures, and potential fire hazards from unmaintained agricultural buildings. Immediate compliance is expected. I folded it in half and tossed it on the kitchen counter. Probably a misfire, probably some overeager intern sending blanket mail to landowners near their boundary. Not the first time bureaucrats played fast and loose with geography. But that Friday, a woman came knocking. I was replacing a cracked post on my front gate when I saw her step out of a Lexus SUV like she owned the air. Blonde bob, sunglasses too big for her face, clipboard in one hand, determination in the other. She introduced herself as Karen Marshall, president of the HOA. "I'm here on behalf of the Willow Grove Association," she said, with a smile that felt like it had teeth. "You received our letter, I presume." "I did, and I assume you're here to apologize for the mistake." She blinked. That threw her off rhythm. "I'm here to discuss bringing your property into compliance. We're working on a new Greenbelt initiative and—" "Stop right there," I said, brushing dirt off my gloves. "This land isn't under your HOA. It never has been. I have the title and zoning files to prove it." Karen didn't flinch. She just shifted strategies like a bad poker player doubling down. "You see, Mr. Cross, Ethan Cross." She gave a polite little nod. "Mr. Cross, even if your property is technically outside HOA boundaries, it's still part of the visual ecosystem of our community. We're trying to improve the aesthetics, promote safety, especially concerning your, rather dilapidated barn. It's an agricultural building, historic, and none of your damn business." Her expression hardened for a second before softening again, like icing over a crack. "We're not trying to cause problems. We simply want to find a cooperative path forward. The HOA is willing to help fund improvements, fencing, landscaping, even partial removal of outbuildings, if you agree to voluntarily align with the community's vision. I leaned on the shovel and gave her a long look. Let me make something real clear, Ms. Marshall. I didn't move out here to become part of a vision. I came for silence, for sovereignty, and for soil. Not for cookie-cutter rules from suburban warlords. Her smile froze in place. Well, I suppose we'll have to escalate this formally. You do what you need to do, I said. Just make sure you spell my name right on the paperwork. She left with her heels sinking into the gravel like they were personally offended. I watched her SUV disappear down the road, tires kicking up dust. Then I walked back to my barn, glanced up at the old structure still standing proud despite the years, and muttered, "Let's see how far they want to take this." Because if there's one thing Karen didn't know, and was about to learn the hard way, it's that I don't bend. Especially not to people who think rules matter more than rights. If the first HOA letter was a warning shot, the second was a declaration of war. It arrived less than a week after my conversation with Karen, printed in bold fonts and dripping with passive-aggressive menace. According to them, I now owed several $100s in fines for unauthorized structures, refusal to comply with community safety standards, and, my favorite, visual pollution. I had to read that one twice, just to make sure it didn't say what I thought it said. But no, my cornfield apparently offended suburban sensibilities. I pinned the notice on my fridge under a magnet shaped like a cow, as a reminder of just how ridiculous people can be. Then the fun really began. A pair of men with binoculars started showing up along the edge of my property every few days. HOA compliance officers, Karen would later call them. They lingered there like bird watchers, except instead of admiring wildlife, they took photos of my barn from every imaginable angle. Sometimes I waved. They never waved back. Then came the whispers. The grocery store cashier, a woman who once called me darlin', suddenly refused eye contact and handed me change like it was contaminated. At the feed store, a neighbor muttered something about illegal waste dumping. Someone else asked if it was true I housed dangerous animals. I guess 2 German shepherds in a fenced yard qualify as a threat now. I ignored most of it. My retirement was supposed to be stress-free, and I wasn't about to let a suburban junta ruin my peace. Still, I took precautions. I installed motion-activated cameras along the fence line. I saved every letter, every notice, every invoice demanding money I didn't owe. I even logged the names of those binocular-wielding vultures. One afternoon, as I was tightening a hinge on the barn door, I heard tires crunching gravel. The same smoke-gray SUV from before rolled onto my land like it owned the place. A man in a suit stepped out. Slick hair, polished shoes, fake smile. "Afternoon, Mr. Cross," he said smoothly. "Name's Bradley. I represent the Willow Grove Development Partners." He extended a business card. I didn't take it. "What do you want, Bradley?" He looked around like he was appraising the land, deciding which parts were valuable and which were in need of demolition. "We'd like to offer you a generous incentive," he said. "You could sell a portion of this underutilized land and pocket a handsome sum. A win for everyone." "Not interested," he chuckled lightly. "You haven't even heard the numbers yet." "I heard the part where you said sell. So, that was enough." His smile wilted just a little. "Mr. Cross, the HOA believes your property is compromising the long-term vision of the community. They're prepared to escalate enforcement if you continue resisting compliance." I stared at him. "Let me ask you something. Did you practice that line in the mirror this morning? because it sounded scripted as hell. He blinked, hands tightening around the card still suspended in the air. I'm trying to help you avoid unnecessary conflict. Oh, don't worry, I said, finally leaning forward. Conflict and I are old friends. He swallowed. The fake smile returned, this time stretched thin like bad wallpaper. We'll be in touch. As he drove away, one of my cameras caught a final shot of his license plate for the file I was building. Not the kind of file I used to work on in D.C., but close enough. Later that week, I woke to the sound of diesel engines revving near my field. I grabbed my boots and stepped outside to see a crew trimming brush and knocking down a section of wire fencing. Not mine, but close. Too close. They were expanding what Karen called the future recreation lawn, and they were pushing right up against my boundary line like toddlers, testing how far they could reach before being slapped away. I marched up and asked for the superintendent. He wasn't there, of course. They're never there when they're doing the stuff they shouldn't be. So I filmed every second. Drones, body cam, phone, 3 different angles. Redundancy is a habit that's hard to shake when you've spent a career preparing for courtroom bloodbaths. That night, Karen sent an email. I could practically hear her sugary tone through the screen. We've noticed you recording our workers. This creates a hostile environment. Please refrain from further interference with community projects. I typed 2 sentences and hit send. Stay off my land. Last warning. To anyone else, this might look like petty suburban nonsense. To me, it looked like the early stages of a siege. Subtle sabotage, social pressure, intimidation tactics, classic escalation. And I knew better than anyone that people drunk on power don't just stop when you ask nicely. They push until something breaks. I just didn't know yet that what would break first wasn't a person. It would be my barn. I should have realized that when people like Karen fail to get compliance through paperwork, they turn to more creative channels. Neighbors started complaining about the smell of diesel near my fence line. A couple of kids on bikes mentioned seeing workers clearing land for the new park. The HOA newsletter, yeah, they mailed me a copy even though I never subscribed, featured a glossy rendering of Phase 1, the Willow Grove Recreation Meadow. I didn't have to squint to recognize the background in that photo. My land, my barn, my cornfields, cropped just enough to pretend otherwise. By the time I walked the north boundary again, the damage was plain. Brush hacked away without regard for property markers, irrigation trenches filled in, tire ruts cutting across the soil like fresh scars. The only thing worse than trespassers are trespassers who claim they're doing you a favor. I filed a formal cease and desist notice with the county. I emailed Karen, her board, and every address on their shiny HOA letterhead. The reply came from a paralegal with the kind of bravado that only comes from not knowing who you're talking to. Your claim is being reviewed. All activities align with the community's legal authority. That was the moment I felt my old instincts wake up. The ones from the dark back rooms of the courthouse. The ones that turned ordinary disagreements into resignation letters. I tightened security, added floodlights, installed a couple more cameras, including a trail cam hidden between stalks of corn. It caught coyotes, a stray raccoon, and eventually something a hell of a lot more interesting. Headlights creeping onto my property in the dead of night. The vehicle rolled to a stop near the barn. Someone stepped out, hood up, face obscured, carrying a can. Not water. Gasoline has a gate, a slosh, and even in night vision green I knew exactly what I was seeing. The figure splashed one side of the barn like it offended him personally. Then he lit something small, flicked it forward, and the screen erupted in white. It took less than 3 minutes for the flames to roar tall enough to lick the roof beams. Dry timber and old farm structures burn fast, faster than fear can translate into action. By the time I sprinted outside, phone in one hand, fire extinguisher in the other, the barn was already lost. I got too close, heat slapping me in the face, smoke clawing down my throat, and a chunk of roof fell where I'd been standing a heartbeat earlier. I stumbled back, coughing, furious, helpless. The sirens wailed in the distance like they were taunting me. When the county engine finally arrived, they took one look, shrugged internally, and soaked what little remained. Embers, ash, and splintered memories. 20 years of equipment and supplies reduced to a smoldering pile. When the last flare-up died and the adrenaline wore off, I stood there staring at the ruin, fists clenched tight enough that my nails drew blood. Then the cavalry of clipboard-wielding parasites arrived. Karen marched forward with the fire captain at her side, draped in false concern. "Oh my goodness, Mr. Cross. What a tragedy! We warned you the barn was a fire hazard," she chirped, voice full of feigned empathy and real satisfaction. "Luckily, our contractors were doing safety work in the area. Perhaps a stray spark." "A stray spark," I repeated, forcing my voice to stay level. My boots were covered in soot, and my patience was buried beneath it. She nodded solemnly. "An unfortunate accident. The official inspector will review it soon. For now, you should be grateful the damage wasn't worse." The fire captain, one of her staples at community barbecues, quickly backed her up. "Likely dry grass ignited during the landscaping project. These old barns go up in a heartbeat. We'll file a report." They left like they came, together, rehearsed, coordinated. I watched their taillights vanish and promised myself that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next day, the official report arrived in my inbox. The declaration was predictable. Spontaneous ignition due to unsafe vegetation management. Nothing suspicious. No need for further investigation. The signature at the bottom belonged to a man named Franklin Marshall, Karen's cousin. That was the moment the switch flipped. The moment the quiet farmer persona died a dignified death. Because now it wasn't just harassment. It was arson, fraud, and conspiracy. The kind of combination that collapses careers. I stood in the morning light, ashes crackling beneath my boots, cameras salvaged and evidence preserved, and whispered to the ruined barn, "You chose the wrong lawyer to set on fire." The thing about lighting a fire is that you better make sure the wind's not blowing toward your own house. Karen never learned that, but I did, and I never forgot how to fan the flames when needed. The morning after I read the bogus fire report, I sent out 3 emails before my second cup of coffee. One to a private investigator I used to call in for sensitive court cases. One to a contact at the state fire marshal's office, someone who owed me a favor from back when he was just a green jacket at the academy. And the third, well, that one went to Judge Jonathan Burke. Most people don't know Judge Burke outside legal circles, and that's exactly how he likes it. Gray-templed, slow-spoken, and terrifying in his stillness. Once, in a courtroom in Atlanta, I watched him dismantle a corruption case so cleanly that the state attorney general resigned before the verdict was even read. We hadn't spoken in years, not because we weren't close, but because we were the kind of men who only speak when it matters. This mattered. His reply came in less than 10 minutes. "I'm listening, and I'm angry." That was enough. Meanwhile, the private investigator had already started pulling threads. The first one to unravel? The so-called fire inspector, Franklin Marshall, was not just Karen's cousin. but a recently suspended employee from another county for falsifying documents during a housing development dispute. My guy even found a scanned signature Franklin had used on an unrelated permit approval, and it didn't match the one on my fire report. Within 24 hours, I had a full dossier of inconsistencies, including timestamps from my security cameras that contradicted the spontaneous ignition theory. I packaged it all with a clean executive summary, formatted like the federal memorandums I used to write in my sleep. Then I sent it to the office of the U.S. Attorney, the State Fire Board, and Just for Fun, Karen's HOA insurance provider. By the end of the day, I had 3 voicemails, 4 email responses, and a certified courier at my gate with a subpoena request for video footage. Things were starting to move. Then I made it public. One of my old friends from the courthouse circuit had since turned into a low-key media personality. He ran a YouTube channel called Civic Wrongs, dedicated to government overreach and HOA horror stories. We sat down in front of the scorched frame of my barn, and I told the story, start to finish, with timestamps, satellite overlays, and the burned remains of my irrigation system as stage props. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't need to. By the end of the interview, he looked at me and said, "You realize this is going to hit 1 million views?" I just nodded. 3 days later, it was at 2.3. Lawyers started calling. Not mine, theirs. HOA board members I'd never met were suddenly deeply concerned and hoping to open a dialogue. One of them even offered to come by with a pie. I politely declined. Karen, however, decided it was time to fight back. She held an emergency HOA meeting, which she framed as a chance to refute harmful rumors. A printed flyer was taped to the community bulletin board talking about baseless attacks on public servants and a regrettable accident being weaponized by a hostile actor. I showed up anyway, not because I needed to be there, but because I knew the look on her face would be worth it. The room fell silent when I walked in. Karen stood at the front like a politician facing bad poll numbers. Behind her, a projector displayed a stock image of a forest fire. She started speaking in that tight, sugary tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. "We believe in community, in safety, and in forgiveness. That's why." "Is that why you faked a fire report?" I said, casually. A few gasps. Someone coughed awkwardly. Karen froze for half a second, then laughed, too loudly. "Mr. Cross, we're not here to entertain conspiracy theories." I took a folder from my coat and held it up. "Would you prefer affidavits, certified documents, video footage of your cousin committing a felony?" More silence. Someone in the back murmured, "Wait, what cousin?" Karen's mouth twitched. Her board members began shifting in their seats. One of them, a balding man in a golf shirt, suddenly looked like he regretted showing up. I didn't stay for the rest. I'd done what I came to do. On my way out, I passed 2 younger men in county fire marshal jackets waiting by the door with clipboards. One of them nodded slightly. The cavalry had arrived. That night, Judge Burke called. They sent me the footage. I saw the report. I'm calling in a few favors of my own. You're not the only one who wants heads to roll. "Appreciated," I said. "You always were the bastard people should have feared," he added. "Glad you haven't gone soft." I went outside, stepped over the blackened husk of the barn's frame, and looked at the stars. Something sharp and slow had shifted. The hunt had begun, and this time I wasn't the prey. The first public casualty of the storm I set in motion was a man named Gerald Compton, treasurer of the Willow Grove HOA, and longtime drinking buddy of Karen's husband. He'd always struck me as the kind of guy who'd wear boat shoes to a funeral and ask if the casket was mahogany. When the financial records were subpoenaed, Gerald folded like a card table in a bar fight. Apparently, he thought he was untouchable. He wasn't. The forensic audit of HOA expenses revealed something beautiful, at least to a man like me. Fraud, embezzlement, inflated contractor invoices, landscaping bills paid twice, and in one case, paid to a company that didn't even exist outside of a Wix website, and a burner phone. Over $70,000 redirected to community improvement projects that either never happened or happened entirely on my side of the property line. The auditors found a fire safety allocation used to buy a new set of patio furniture for the HOA clubhouse. And tucked into those documents, a line item for vegetation removal services, Parcel 13C, my land, dated 2 days before the fire. That invoice was signed by Karen herself. When the news broke, the local paper didn't bury it. Front page. HOA funds misused in arson-linked development plan. The article included a screenshot from my barn cam right as the arsonist lit the match. I was careful not to identify the figure. I wasn't after the kid. He was just a hired hand. The people who paid him were the ones who needed a spotlight. Karen responded the way all tyrants do when cornered. She doubled down. "This is character assassination," she said during an impromptu HOA livestream. "We are the victims of a coordinated smear campaign. Mr. Cross has a vendetta against our community and is manipulating the system to intimidate us." She wore a navy blazer, pearls, and her signature Botox snarl. But the cracks were starting to show. Her voice wavered. The HOA board behind her looked more like a firing squad than a support group. They all knew it now. The oxygen was running out. 2 days later, the feds showed up. 3 black SUVs parked neatly outside the HOA administrative building. Agents from the Financial Crimes Division entered quietly and exited loudly, dragging out boxes of records and one very pale-looking Gerald. The sight of him handcuffed in his Vineyard Vines vest did something cathartic to my blood pressure. Karen wasn't arrested that day, but she might as well have been. Her empire was in free fall. Emails leaked. Turns out, her campaign to push me off the land had started long before she ever knocked on my door. There were threads going back 18 months, plans to reclaim visual continuity, discussions about strategically acquiring stubborn plots, even references to pushing him toward voluntary compliance by increasing exposure to risk. One board member commented, "Make it so uncomfortable that he wants to leave." Simple. I kept every screenshot, sent them to the prosecutor's office, sent them to Judge Burke, sent them to the insurance company currently building a case to deny Karen's liability protection. That's when I got the call I wasn't expecting, from one of her own. His name was Tom Gallagher. He was on the HOA board, technically. More of a silent vote, the kind who joined just to keep an eye on his property taxes. He wanted to meet. I agreed. We sat on a park bench in Willow Grove, about 50 feet from where Karen once wanted to build her community garden. "I didn't sign up for this," Tom said, eyes on the sidewalk. "I thought she was just intense. I didn't know she was lying on legal documents." "She wasn't just lying," I said. "She was building a fire with paper soaked in gasoline." Tom looked me in the eye then. "I'll testify. I'll give you everything. Memos, emails, board minutes. I've got backups Karen doesn't know about." I shook his hand. "Good. Just make sure you save a copy for yourself." The next week, I filed a civil lawsuit against the HOA and Karen individually. The complaint was 78 pages long. Arson, fraud, defamation, conspiracy, malicious trespass, and enough contract violations to make a law school final exam blush. They tried to file a counterclaim for harassment. It was dismissed in less than 10 minutes. At this point, even the HOA's lawyer was visibly uncomfortable. You could tell he wanted to walk out mid-hearing and scrub his LinkedIn before anyone connected his name to this mess. But it was too late. The flames were already licking the walls. Karen called a final emergency board meeting. Only 2 members showed up. One brought a resignation letter. That night, a notice went out to all Willow Grove residents. The HOA board was being suspended pending legal review. All actions frozen. All accounts locked. My neighbor called me just to say, "I've never heard silence sound so good." The courtroom wasn't anything special. Standard beige walls, fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly like tired hornets, and those uncomfortable pew-style benches that make you wonder if justice is meant to be earned through lumbar punishment. But to me, it was hallowed ground. I'd spent decades inside rooms like this, crafting arguments that sunk careers and defending ones that deserved saving. This time, though, I was here for myself. And I'd be lying if I said that didn't feel strange. My name was listed first on the docket. Cross Virf Willow Grove, Homeowners Association, et al. Defendants: Karen Marshall, Gerald Compton, the HOA board, and 2 affiliated contractors. Claims: arson, fraud, conspiracy, trespassing, civil harassment, destruction of private property, and a handful of others the judge would later refer to as ambitiously thorough. Karen arrived wearing beige, like she was trying to blend into the walls. Her lawyer looked like he regretted his entire life. I could almost see the words, "I should have stuck to wills and divorces," floating behind his eyes. The courtroom filled quickly. Press, locals, legal interns hoping for drama. Even a couple of HOA presidents from nearby communities showed up, probably to see how not to run an association. One of them, I later learned, resigned the following week. The opening statements were tame, cautious, all legal etiquette and forced civility. But once the evidence came in, the walls started to sweat. My team presented the following: video footage of the arsonist pouring gasoline and lighting my barn. A time-stamped invoice for vegetation control dated 2 days before the fire. A faked fire report signed by Franklin Marshall, who, under oath, admitted he never visited the site and was paid as a favor. Bank statements showing HOA funds used for unauthorized projects. Emails between Karen and Gerald discussing how to pressure Cross into giving up the land. HOA board minutes with redacted sections until Tom Gallagher, our star witness, handed over the originals. But the part that really sealed it was the recording from the community meeting. Karen, on a hot mic before it started, whispering to a board member, "If this doesn't shut him up, we'll just lose the report and say it was an act of God." You could have heard a pin drop. Her lawyer stuttered, tried to pivot to the lack of direct link between Karen and the arsonist. But that bridge had already burned, along with my barn. Then came my turn on the stand. I didn't perform. I didn't rehearse. I told the truth. I talked about the land, about legacy, about how people like Karen weaponize policy to mask greed. I described the fire, what it smelled like, sounded like. I talked about how it felt watching something you built with your hands collapse under the weight of someone else's ego. I didn't raise my voice once. When I stepped down, the courtroom was silent again. Even the judge looked like he needed a minute. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. Verdict: liable on all counts. The HOA was ordered to pay me $2.7 million in damages. Karen was fined personally, $500,000 plus loss of her property insurance coverage, her position in the HOA, and a civil restraining order. She tried to protest, something about bankruptcy, harassment, vindictive targeting. The judge cut her off with a single line. "You didn't just break the rules, Ms. Marshall. You tried to burn them down and got caught in the fire." Her lawyer slumped. Gerald wept. One of the contractors fainted. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd of neighbors clapped as I walked to my truck. Reporters asked for a statement. I gave them one. You don't get to bully people off their land just because your lawn committee says it clashes with the scenery. Then I got in, turned the key, and drove home, past the scorched lot, past the new fence I was already planning, past the boundary line Karen had tried so hard to erase. This was my land. Still standing, still mine. 1 year later, the land breathes easy. The cornfields have grown thicker than ever, swaying in perfect rhythm with the breeze that rolls off the hills. The new barn stands where the old one burned, bigger, smarter, reinforced with metal siding, solar-powered lights, and a weather-controlled irrigation system I could have never justified before the lawsuit. Sometimes I walk through it just to hear the satisfying creak of the new doors and smell the clean, oiled scent of machinery that doesn't yet carry the weight of memory. But I kept one wall from the original frame, charred and blackened. Not because I'm sentimental, because history deserves a scar. The dogs still roam the perimeter like they're guarding a national secret. They've earned it. They were the first to bark the night of the fire, and the first to greet the investigator who helped take everything down. I gave them new collars and a bigger pen. Hell, sometimes I think they understand more than most jurors ever did. Across the road, the HOA clubhouse is boarded up. The windows are dark, the lawn overgrown. A for sale sign has been stabbed into the dirt like a surrender flag. I hear no one wants to take over as president. Seems the job lost its shine after Karen's trial. Funny how fast tyrants become cautionary tales. As for Karen herself, she moved to another state, reportedly to live with a cousin. Hopefully not Franklin, unless she enjoys roommates with matching ankle monitors. She tried to rebrand as a community strategist, but every time someone Googles her name, my case is the first 10 results. That's the thing about fire. It leaves a smoke trail. Now, here's the fun part. Near the western edge of my property, on a slice of land the HOA once wanted for their so-called recreation zone, I've built something new. Nothing grand, just a few benches, a shade structure, and a carved wooden sign that reads, Karen Marshall Memorial Green Space. For those who forgot what boundaries are for. People thought I was joking until I installed it. Every Saturday, local folks come by with coffee and folding chairs. They laugh, tell stories, and sometimes ask me how the hell I pulled it all off. I usually say, it wasn't hard, I just didn't blink. One of the newer residents, sweet woman named Rosie, started bringing lemonade and fresh pie to the gatherings. She's the one who suggested we plant sunflowers where the old boundary line used to be. They're tall now, radiant and defiant, stretching like nature's middle finger to everything that came before. Judge Burke visited once, showed up in his old Buick, wearing a fishing vest and a grin that made him look 20 years younger. You always were a bastard with a long memory, he said, handing me a bottle of scotch. Glad you didn't lose your bite. I only bite when someone chews first, I told him. He stayed for an hour, laughed when he saw the memorial sign, took a photo next to it, and promised to hang it in his office. Said it would be a nice reminder to the fresh-faced interns that justice doesn't come with a dress code. There's a kind of peace now that wasn't there before. Not the kind born from quiet, but from conquest. The land didn't just survive, it won. And so did I. Sometimes, as the sun dips low and paints the cornfields gold, I sit on the porch, pour a glass of that scotch, and think about all the things people try to take that don't belong to them. Some want your land, others your silence. A few, like Karen, want your submission dressed up as cooperation. But out here, we still believe in fences, and fire doesn't scare us.